Apyayantu mamangani vak pranaschakshu shrotramatho balamindriyani cha sarvani sarvam brahma upanishadam maham brahma nirakuryam Mama Brahma Nirakarot Anirakaranam Astvanirakaranam Me Astu Tadatmani Nirateya Upanishatsu Dharmaste Mayi Santu Te Mayi Santu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So chapter 3 of Kena Upanishad is a story, as we've begun, about the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys are called Devas, and the bad guys are called Asuras. And see, the thing is, when someone comes with a talent, and right, this talent is wonderful, and we all have talents in life. The thing is, when one's not quite accounting how many people were required for that talent to develop, how many people were actually required for you to be right here, right now? Teachers, previous teachers, friends. How many of us have got introduced to Vedanta through somebody else? Everyone, right? Almost everyone. So we're all here because of so many people that have helped us, like, kind of find our way through this, right, life of, entanglements and marketplace of options. And thus, when the person comes to their successful position, they can come a little bit excessively proud about their position, and it can kind of disconnect one from the world. So the devas are becoming to be, the good guys are becoming to be excessively proud. And now, Ishvara wants to send them a savior, wants to send them somebody, just, hey, let me just give you a little knock before you too turn into an asura, a bad guy. So we've defined that deva, okay? The word deva means two definitions. Would someone like to revise? Yeah, a celestial being, yeah. All knowledge, all power, when looked at from different standpoint, in reference to a law such as psychology, then we call that psychology deva, okay? When it comes to knowledge and power that distributes intelligence to each one of us, we call that same Ishvara, we call it Saraswati. And thus, by honoring Saraswati, you're actually honoring Ishvara. So it allows you to focus, what is it that is important to me in my life? So in that case, it becomes a Saraswati Deva, a Lakshmi, the one who distributes wealth, right, money, resources in life, Deva. So this is the terms for Deva. Now, what happens is, these Devas who won the war, okay, they want to find out who is this Yaksha, who is this celestial, like, beautiful being. That's what Yaksha means, just a wise person, a wise celestial being, okay? And so they send Agni, and te agnim abruvan jata veda etat vijanihi kim etat yaksham iti tata iti. So very simple, it says they assign Agni, Deva. Now remember, this is definition number 1, right, of Deva. They assign Agni Deva to find out who the Yaksha is. And what happens then? As in the next verse, 3.4, which I'm not going to read because they're very short verses, as the Agni, okay, Agni means fire, okay? As Agni approaches this Yaksha, what happens is, before Agni can even say, hi, how are you? Okay? Immediately Yaksha says, who are you? Now, Agni is a big thing. Agni is like this celestial, being who is so important. And, you kind of think you're the superstar. Everyone knows me as Michael Jackson. I am, whoever, right? All these names. And someone comes up to you and says, who are you? What happens immediately? Your pride goes down. So Deva is like, Agni Deva is a little bit shaken up. And what happens, Agni responds, he says, well, I am the great Agni. Don't you know me? I am very important. I play a huge role in this universe. I am well known. I am the one that distributes wealth. Because in the Vedic rituals, see, this is where the culture is sometimes important. So the reason it says distribute wealth is because in the Vedic rituals, the primary tool for performing any ritual is a fire. Now you say why? Because it's just kind of a fact. Okay, why? Because a fire is able to burn all of those goodies that you send into the fire and as though distribute it. Now it's kind of, you think, well, this is science fiction. Well, you can't think of it this way, but the idea of a ritual is that the more time you put into any process, the greater the returns. And a prayer takes, 1 minute, 5 seconds, but a ritual, that can take 2 hours. Therefore, you're getting so much of a greater return. As I said, we did a ritual in Rishikesh. There was a person who was sick in Germany, they were having cancer. And so the priest performed a certain ritual for, potentially removing that chance of cancer spreading. So how does this work, right? There is some science behind it in the Vedas, but he couldn't save him. Why? Because the cancer was spreading so fast that you couldn't stop it, and the person died anyway. It doesn't mean that the rituals don't work. It just means that it's crossed its boundaries now, okay? And such, Agni is the one who distributes resources. Every single ritual uses fire. It's a big entity, it's a huge deal. And it's being asked, who are you, fire? You're kidding me, I'm important. Now what happens? So Agni says, I can distribute wealth, to Yaksha. And then the next verse, Yaksha says, well, show me what you can do. Intriguing, show me. Let me see how you can do this. And what does Agni reply? Well, suppose you have siddhis, right? And siddhis are some good things that you can do, right? You can calculate numbers, you can, what else? Right, you can... I've never seen that, but okay. Has anyone ever seen that? I don't know. But suppose you just have some, you can read someone's mind or whatever, numbers or something, whatever. And someone asks you, what do you do? What do you do? Depending on where you're at, how mature the person is, they will twist that, what they know, and make it sound like a big deal. Okay, even though it's like an ordinary thing, they will twist their words and make it sound like it's some huge thing, but it's not a huge thing. Now, in Agni's case, fire. Now, what can fire do? And what else can fire do? It can destroy. What else can it do? Clean, brilliant. What else can it do? Transform, even better. What else can it do? Okay, fire. Fire is the essence of light, right? We all used fire, outside to warm ourselves. It's so cozy, right? When it's cold and you all come around the fire and do ritual dances and so on.
And as we learned Agni is so important because it's the first, it is the only thing that whatever you offer, it doesn't matter which entity you offer it. It can transform the goodies, the food, into, it breaks it down in atoms or something else, so it can be transferred to a higher level of,
yeah.
That's why it's important.
Yeah, so this is the idea. So fire can, apparently, send your message to the right devas. Now, how the science of this works, you research this in the Vedas. Okay, I'm just mentioning what the Kena Upanishad says. And sometimes you don't have to be so logical. Everything has to make perfect sense. Sometimes you just have to loosen up, listen to the story, because the story has metaphors to offer you, and we will see how it builds up. Okay, so in this case. The Agni says, whatever is here, out of all of the Agni's wonderful offerings like transform and give light, Agni says, I can burn. I can burn anything here. Whoa, right now you're like, I'm afraid, hoping to invoke some kind of a thing in this yaksha. Okay? And then verse 3.6, Tasmai trinam nidadhau etad daha iti tad preyaya sarva javena tatna shashaka dagdhum satata eva nivavrte na etad ashakam vijnatum yat etat yaksham iti. So what happens? The yaksha places a blade of grass in front of the Agni and says, here, like a blade of grass, here, burn it. Simple job, right? So what happens? Now, if Agni claimed Agni can burn anything, why would you want to now burn this grass? Right? Why take up this simple challenge if you can burn up anything? Well, as long as there's an insecurity in the person, right? They may not know about it, but there is some insecurity that I haven't quite, right? This is not really true, what I claim. What I claim is not really true. Who are you? I'm a teacher. Well, and then you start asking them questions, and they get, they kind of get confronted and they, walk away. So there's some insecurity about a person. Like, what do? I'm a programmer. And then you say, create me a program. And then you're like, oh, I can't do that. Well, because, you're not really, confident about programming or whatever it is. So as long as there's an insecurity in us, then we will find a way to, retreat slowly. But we will also have a need to prove ourselves. And this is what Agni is doing now. So thus, what happens? Agni takes up the challenge and cannot burn the grass. Can't do it. Now, how does Agni feel? Rejected, defeated, deflated. Right? He thought, I can burn anything here and I can't burn this grass. So again, this means that the higher up we go in the hierarchy of our position, like an employer, as I said, or a CEO who has all these employees underneath, it's very easy in that position to feel a sense of entitlement. And when something happens, someone walks away or doesn't comply to you, you see that you're not as in control as you thought you were. Same thing with those who are parents, right? Parents, children, grow up. But the moment they reach what, 3 or 4, even 3, right? They start to talk and talk. All before that, not many words. When they start to say all these words, it's very different. So, and you say, wow, I cannot, right? I cannot quite, have this child comply as much as I thought I could. And then the child has their own ways, right? Their own conduct, their own life. And so it becomes challenging. And therefore, what life shows you is that even if I thought I had total control, I actually don't have as much control as I thought I did. So you do have some level of control, but not as much as we think. And this is what is being slowly shown to these devas, because they thought we alone won the victory. It was our victory alone. And so thus they thought we control the circumstances. But they're going to be shown it was not their victory alone. There was more to their victory. Okay? Therefore, Agni felt ashamed. And not only felt ashamed and dejected, but didn't ask. Didn't stop and ask, how come I can't burn this grass? I should be able to burn this grass, Mr. Yaksha, Mrs. Yaksha. So this is another indicator. when our pride is hurt in such a way, then the person can have a choice. Either I can ask and say, hey, I don't understand. Can you help me out? Give me some feedback here. Or retreat and protect the self-image and walk away that everything is fine, nothing is wrong, right? It's all just, some special grass, it's none of my business. And so Agni retreated in, we don't know, either denial. Denial is when something is not even acknowledged. So something is there, but it's not acknowledged. Someone has some condition and they say, it's not a big deal. It's just, it's just me going through a time in my life. So this is a way to cope with one's insecurities, just to put it down and make it, like it's nothing true. So one of these two, Agni fell for. And what is the symbolism of Agni unable to burn the grass? What do you think is the symbolism of this, having heard so far? Right, I knew I could, but I don't know. So in other words, the bubble is starting to pop. Therefore, as long as we, do our thing, but disconnected from Ishvara's order, then Ishvara makes it in such a way that eventually you discover that you are not as capable as you thought you were. So the moment confidence goes up, like, yeah, I am so good at this, Ishvara finds a way to pop your bubble, throws you some test in life and says, nope, there's a little bit more to do. In Tao Te Ching, there's a beautiful verse that I never forgot early on, many years. It says, there is a certain law in nature that when you grow high, nature finds a way to cut you off. When you grow too loud, too big, nature finds a way to cut you off. So that's why when some celebrity can grow very big, and suddenly all of this competition and all these media starts to come now. So there's a certain thing that this Tao Te Ching says, right? Before you get too high, know when you've reached your limit and stay low key. That way, right, you will always be able to have a smooth ride. The moment you go over it, something finds a way to cut you off. So like this, the symbolism is thus that we acknowledge our talents. There's nothing wrong with Agni's talents to burn. This is lovely. But again, that when I lose sense that I need contribution of other people for my success, then the talent becomes distorted. It becomes an entitlement, and it doesn't serve me anymore. It becomes an obstruction. And at the same time, yes, the whole thing is, Agni in Ishvara's order. But at the same time, it's not like now say, I'm just a servant of Ishvara, I'm just a small being, I am just trying to figure it all out. Understand through this course, we've just gone through the whole teaching. It's not like your existence is different from Ishvara's. It is one and the same reality. So on one hand, one remains humble. I am a servant of the Lord. But at the same time, not, I'm just a servant of the Lord. I'm just making my way through. I've got a long way to go. So this now becomes condescending, becomes self-depreciating onto oneself. So there's a fine line between humility and a healthy, I sense, a healthy confidence. Okay. Now, what happens? Well, Agni goes to the Devas, he goes back, or she goes back, and says, hello, brothers, I couldn't figure out who this Yaksha is. Doesn't say, I couldn't burn the grass, I failed the challenge. None of that. I couldn't figure out who the Yaksha is. In other words, you protect that which is embarrassing. It's shameful. Now the next verse, what happens? The mission is given to Vayu. And the same thing. So Devas assign Vayu to find out who this Yaksha is. Let's see. Vayu means air. So now we got the air Devata or Deva, air celestial being. Again, before the air can say anything, Yaksha says to the air, who are you? Same thing like Agni. And Vayu responds, don't you know me? I'm the well-known Vayu. I freely move in the sky. Nothing holds me down. This is kind of cool, isn't it? Fire can be put out by a high tornado or water, but if you're air, you can move anywhere you want. You're not stuck to any place. You provide cooling for people. You're a big deal as air. Okay? I'm not tied to any one place. So in other words, the qualities between Agni and Vayu are wonderful. They're both high qualities. But what the verses are saying is that if they both have excess sense of ownership, like entitlement, this is mine, then what happens is, right, again, Ishvara will find a way to pop your bubble. Some have intelligence, some have beauty, some have singing skills, but where they all can come to a place of sameness is excessive pride, sense of ownership. And all three of them, Ishvara finds a way to cut you off. Not cut you off, but just bring you back down to earth. This is called bring you back down to earth. Doesn't matter what the skill is. You can be the greatest scientist in this world, the greatest discoverer in this world. But if I'm disconnected from the order, either way, the law is made such that I am brought right back down to the world. It's almost like Ishvara has one law, humility. And then verse 3.9. So Yaksha now asks Vayu, so you're a well-known Vayu, you can walk, you can move freely in the sky, nothing holds you down. What is your speciality? And then Vayu replies, well, now before I answer, what can air do? It can lift things.
But it gives life to us because we breathe air.
Lovely. It can give life to us because we breathe it. What else can air do? It pervades everything. What benefits can air do for us? What benefits can it do for us? Perfect, right? One day maybe we'll have just so many, these, what do you call them, windmills, right? This is lovely. What else can air do for us? It's hot. You open the windows. There's the breeze. It's a big deal. I can't concentrate. I need the power of air to have some cooling. Upstairs, I have a fan because when we came here, it was hot. And that's why I'm able to close my door with closed windows and doors and still have a lovely time in that little room, which was like a oven. Why? Because I brought a wind-making machine. And if I didn't bring that wind-making machine, I would probably be very different down here. And you would have felt that. And all of that goes to the glory of air. So, like Agni, air can do many benefits. But again, because Agni is yet to get educated, right? There's nothing wrong with not being educated. Is yet to be educated. What does Agni opt for? What does Vayu opt for? What's the question here? What is your speciality? I can lift anything on earth through cyclones. Another scary one. This one's burn everything. This one's cyclones. In other words, right? I bring some scary power to invoke a lot of emotion in you. Whoa, you're a big deal.
Can you say he also feels greater than fire because he can just put it down?
You could say that too. I can put out my previous brother out. Yes. I can knock them out. That would be one step extra, right? One step above. I'm better than the guy previously. Yes. Okay, so again, mentions the destructive force. So, politics, I do follow politics just a little bit. And you can hear the presidents sometimes of certain countries say, we will, we're thinking of nuclear. They just word one nuclear. It's like, whoa, nuclear, you got the power for that. Just one word invokes so much, talk in the world. So this is human nature. When I'm disconnected from the unity of all things, the unity that connects us all, like that string that connects the beads, which are both laws and forms, connected by Ishvara. If I'm disconnected from that, then I want to stand out. The moment I'm disconnected from God, immediately I have a need to make myself bigger by claiming some destructive force, some destructive power, and reasserting my authority. This is how it is in every culture that we witness. If you look at all of the historical dictators and history, it's always been the same like that, always claiming power of destruction. And then using religion as a weapon, weaponizing religion. And now Agni and Vayu, they're still good, right? They're still good people, but right, Yaksha wants to save them from going into Asura stage. Now Yaksha gives Vayu a challenge. And what happens? The Yaksha places a grass before the Vayu and asks, lift it, please. Lift up this grass. Let's see what you can do. And again, Vayu responds, hey, I can uplift anything in this world, or in that world. What is this? It's a joke. You asking me to lift this? Sounds like a total joke. But anyway, he takes up the challenge and is unable to. With all force, Vayu blows left and right and is unable to succeed. And what happened then? Well, Vayu retreats, he returns to the Devas, and he says again, like the former, I could not find out who this Yaksha is. In other words, again, different talents, wonderful talents, but when we're ignorant of Ishvara's order, then these talents can, be misused. This is just how it works out sometimes. My talent. Okay? So look at this. So Yaksha isn't here to give a hard time to Agni and Vayu. That's not the intention, to give you a hard time. All that Yaksha wants to say is that if both of you thought you had control, you would be able to lift this grass up. If you thought you had as much control as winning that war, and that control was carried over in this situation, you would have that equal amount of control to lift this grass up. But you don't. This is what the Yaksha wants to show. And thus, like this, both of them had the opportunity to investigate and ask, how come I can't lift this grass up? What's going on in me? What insecurities are going on in me? What am I ignorant of here? What am I missing out here? That is offered as a chance. But what's also on the table is, well, I'm just going to, just put this under the carpet like nothing ever happened and go back to my glory. Go back to my comfortable little place of, my life, my comfortable life. Okay? So this is again human nature. When we come to something not comfortable, then there is a tendency sometimes to just not investigate it into it at all. In fact, Vayu says here I couldn't, he goes back to Devas and says, I couldn't discover this Yaksha. So this means life always gives you an opportunity to investigate when there is a fall, when there is something that threw me off. So that is a perfect opportunity to look into it. Not later. Let me remember once upon a time. It's too late. But when the context is right, when the context is strong, then the person has the opportunity to look into their shortcomings. What made me run away? What made me retreat? Why did I not stay and investigate what is to be done? This is what Yaksha, the wise celestial being, wants to show us. that you have a choice. Vayu comes back to the Devas. Who's left now? Indra. Now Indra is the king of all Devas. And Devas are now coming together and they're having a little discussion. And Indra says, hey, my people can't figure this out. I would take up this task. I'm the king of Devas. Let me put the matters into my own hands. Ooh, let's see. Let's find out what happens next. So now the Devas ask Indra to find out who is this Yaksha. And Indra agrees, I will indeed find out. And as Indra approaches, the Yaksha disappears. What happened here? The Yaksha disappears. So Indra got to see him, but not long enough. Before Indra could say something to Yaksha, Yaksha disappeared. And what happened then? Verse 3.12, an effulgent woman appeared in Yaksha's place, called Uma. Now, Uma represents a guru, an avatara, a guru. And immediately, when she appears, a beautiful woman, Uma, when she appears, Indra immediately asks her, hey, what is the nature of this Yaksha? It disappeared. Look at this. First question wants to know, what is the nature of that Yaksha that was there, that eluded my dear friends? I want to know. In other words, the prior Devas didn't have the right mindset, didn't have the right readiness to see the Yaksha, because they retreated. They saw this celestial being who represents Brahma Vidya, by the way, the potential to gain knowledge. But they were not ready enough. Their minds was not ready. So thus they couldn't stay long enough. But Indra's attitude was curious, open-minded, humble. Indra had the capacity to ask, who is this? I want to know. Help me find out. This is where Indra is acknowledging his helplessness, as we spoke before. Acknowledging my helplessness, saying, I can't figure it out on my own. Help me. This is a big step in one's journey. So Yaksha had the right attitude, had the right approach, had the right mindset, had the right readiness of the mind. It was all there. And it's similar to Arjuna and Krishna, who one was a guru, one was a student. And Arjuna kept asking Krishna for the longest amount of time for limited things. Limited things. Since childhood, they knew each other. Why did Arjuna ask for limited things to Krishna, the Lord of the universe? Because that's what Arjuna was ready for. He could not ask for anything more than Arjuna was ready for. It's not like Arjuna was intentionally asking for limitation. That's just what he was accustomed to. Until one day, when Arjuna became slightly more ready, he began to ask a different kind of question. And that's exactly the kind of answer Arjuna started to receive. So like this, Indra was ready enough to see something else, to open one's mind to something else that the prior two Devas were not. And thus Indra was able to attract the guru called Uma, because he had the right eligibility. And therefore, in this example, even if you're Arjun, even then you're curious of self-knowledge, even then it doesn't mean that those who are like Arjunas will stay. Because there are many people in this world, like Arjuna, who are relatively ready, But how many stay in the tradition? Very, very few. A lot of them come, but fewer stay. And those who stay for the self-knowledge, to grasp the final reality, how many stay long enough and reflect long enough to make it concrete? As we said, tat parya nishchaya, to stay with the intention of understanding deeply and deeply and deeply and deeply. Very, very few. Now, Indra happened to be one of those very, very few who not only asked, but wanted to understand. That's why he said to Uma, who is this yaksha? Now, in this case, yaksha represents potential for my freedom, self-knowledge, Brahma Vidya. So what is the nature of this self-knowledge? And thus Uma started to say, okay, so the story continues between Uma and Indra, 4.1, let's see, I'll read this. Okay, so Sa Brahma iti ha uvacha brahmanaha va etad vijaye mahiyadvam iti tataha ha eva vidanchakara Brahma iti. So Uma shows finally to Indra, because Indra asked, who is this yaksha? And Uma was compelled to reply. And she says, this yaksha is Brahman. And any victory of yours is Brahman's alone. So think about this. Indra asked, who is this yaksha? Yaksha represents the final knowledge. Indra is a celestial being, very sophisticated. So even a celestial being is born with ignorance. No different than we are here. And even a celestial being needs Uma, the guru, and needs yaksha, the self-knowledge. In other words, celestial being, as sophisticated and elevated as they are, in a different loka, different world, wherever that is, equally, they need the same guru and the same knowledge as you need here on earth. This means no matter how refined one's mind is, no matter how sophisticated one's mind is, remember, this is Deva we're talking about, whose intellect, whose refinement is so much greater than of a human being, because they got so much more merit, punyam, right? Punyam, and therefore they're in this different world. So much more sophisticated, and yet that too is not enough for recognition of one's nature. Which is really interesting if you look at it, because we have yogis, with all due respect, I adore yogis because they're so committed to their journey, who are spending a whole lifetime, refining the mind, refining the mind, refining the mind, hoping to refine the mind so much to come in contact with some reality. And the second type is refining the mind, refining the mind, refining the mind, so obsessed of refining the mind to come in contact with some reality, like an ordinary person. And yet you have a Deva who's 100,000 times more, already more refined than 100 years worth of yogi's effort on earth. And that Deva is already there, just by the virtue of being a Deva. And they too cannot figure out Ishvara nor Brahman.
What also draws my attention in this chapter is that the other devas, like Agni and Vayu, the Yata, the Yaksha, asks to them, who are you? But Indra asks to the Yaksha, who are you? And that's also a big difference.
Yes, and Yaksha disappeared.
Yes, but has that some meaning, or is it just in just a way of storytelling?
Well, Yaksha asked, not Yaksha, Indra asked Yaksha, who are you?
Yes, but the others do not.
And vanished. In other words, whatever the Yaksha said went right over Indra's head.
Yeah.
He couldn't understand because it's just so above his head. He needs the guru to represent what the yaksha is actually talking about. So this means even if you're shown the knowledge by yourself, you still need the help of someone to bring out the deeper meaning of the words. Remember lakshyartha, the deeper meaning, and vachyartha, the direct meaning. So Indra has an advantage here, and his advantage over the other devas are, give me some examples. What could Indra's advantage be here that the other devas didn't have? Humbleness, curiosity, lovely, a relatively well-composed mind. Dedication, persistence, steadfastness, these are all good, excellent qualities. Yeah.
I think he had the knowledge to understand that he was dealing with something bigger, and because he knew that it was something bigger, because the other two gods weren't able to figure it out. So somehow he understands that he has to have another approach to this being.
Yeah. So there was something about Indra that he could recognize that, right, I don't quite understand this. And he didn't stop there. He then continued to ask for help. He acknowledged his helplessness, and he, with humility, with curiosity, came forward and says, I don't want to miss this chance because it is in front of me. I don't want to miss it. And that takes a certain kind of character to do that. Even if you're very smart, very intelligent, even as a teacher, no different. No different. Because everyone that is born throughout the entire life will always have limited knowledge and limited power. So the learning never stops.
So Indra did not put out this claim. The other gods, they claimed.
Yes, good.
Impressive claim they put out. Indra didn't do that.
Yeah, he didn't claim his status of being the king of all devas. A woman can, show you something.
Most gurus are male
There's also females throughout the Vedas. A little bit. It's a patriarchal kind of Sanskrit is patriarchal language, but Uma is top notch.
So can we say that when the student is ready, the guru appears?
So when the student has developed enough sincerity, enough open-mindedness, enough curiosity, enough acknowledgement that no matter what I do, all of my self-claims of being some big person, some big thing, it just doesn't really help me at all. I'm still the exact same person as I was 20 years ago, as 5 years ago. All I've been really doing is just claiming things left and right, going from person to person, and I'm still here carrying the same kind of thoughts, and I really want to put all that aside and find a person with total humility. Now I come to this person and say, teach me please, I don't know anything, like this. So yes, when the student is ready, relatively advanced, relatively quiet, relatively mature, then the teacher will, they will feel attraction, a certain attraction. So Indra saw two things that prior devas didn't. Indra saw, by the help of Uma, Ishvara, the cause of the universe. That means their victory was owing to intelligence, which is putting things together, which is gracing them with their victory. What does this mean, gracing them? It means that
They made efforts.
excellent. They made lovely. So they made positive effort. The devas made good efforts before, and as we said, the cause-effect relationship is such that for every positive cause that is keeping with ethics, it returns a corresponding result. And thus, Indra comes to recognize that victory wasn't theirs alone. There's an order here which has blessed them this victory. Not randomly, just because they're devas, but because they were keeping with the laws. That means the laws were in their favor. And now, having that being true, they were able to be clear enough to win the war. That's why Arjuna needed Krishna, because Krishna was representing that clear buddhi, clear mind, knows exactly what to do, when, the right time, and when not to act, and when to act, and how much to act, and at what frequency to act. For that, you need Krishna. You need a clear buddhi, intellect. And he also recognized Brahman, the final reality. So two things Indra got to learn by the help of Uma. First, the intelligence, because of which they have been graced, and second of all, Brahman, which is also the final truth of them all. This is what Indra's humility has gotten him. And Indra realized you cannot know Brahman unless you bring in Ishvara. Because Brahman, as we said, is attributeless. How are you going to go from form to something that has no form, something that is without any characteristics or properties? You can't do it. But what can the mind do? What can the mind grasp? Form. The mind can grasp form. And then, having grasped the form, which has been doing since time immemorial, what can then that mind start to do with that form? Perform the analysis. Analysis by analysis, forms within forms, within forms, within forms, which is even a scientist can do, anyone can do. And then it comes to the final cause, which is intangible, which is undefinable. You cannot define intelligence, because to define it, you're defining a form, which is an effect of intelligence. That's why you cannot define the cause, because the cause's effects are that which you can define. Therefore, by grasping the form, the mind can perform the analysis that that form is reducible ultimately into the final building block of the universe, which is intelligence. And thus, whatever I see in this universe is nothing but that name and form taking on that name and form. And then one level underneath, chair, name and form, taking chair, name and form. Wood, name and form, taking on wood, name and form. Atoms, name and form, taking on atoms, name and form. But if I look into the atoms, I can't find them. Now it's quarks, name and form. If I look into quarks, I can't find them either. Now it is finally reducible into where Vedanta comes in, intelligence. And you cannot have intelligence outside of a conscious being. Just like you can't have a dream of intelligence outside a conscious being. Intelligence can only put together forms in the presence of a conscious being. Therefore, the final reducible, which you cannot reduce any further, that all reduces into consciousness. And you cannot reduce consciousness further. Because every time you try to reduce your consciousness, then who's there watching that reduction?
So we say Brahman is Sat, Chit, Ananda.
Satchit Anantam, we learned in this course.
What you say is in the Chit or in the Sat and the Chit is intelligence inherent.
So, okay, good question. So, the final reality is defined with 3 words to help you understand. It's not like they're different things. So the final reality is the final reality. And then you have to give it some name. And we said one of the names is its existence, but not existence like existent marker. It's not existent within time and space. It is general existence, the substance from which every other existent thing comes from. So when I say marker is, sun is, air is, thought is, sound is, emotion is, future is, past is, present is, they're all just names and forms of is. So the is one common substratum in and through all of these names and forms which depend on isness. And that isness isn't just some random isness out there. What kind of a isness is it? It is a wherefore isness. That means its very nature is a wherefulness. It is fully conscious of itself as the isness one, as the existent one. And what kind of an existent, a wherefore reality is it? Is it one over there, another over there? No, it is one without a second. It is anantam. It means there is nothing outside it. Because anything to be outside it, now you got a problem of two existences, one there and another there. Now, what separates existence one and existence two? Space. Now, who created space? So you go into a logical problem. Okay? Therefore, the reality is Sat and Chit. Sat and Chit enjoys the capacity to manifest the universe, which is called Maya. When Maya is activated and manifest in the universe, then in reference to the world, we say, who created this world? We say, it is Ishvara. What is Ishvara? Ishvara is this capacity of knowledge power manifesting itself as names and forms.
Yeah. So intelligence is the capacity, belongs to the capacity of Maya. It is inherent to Maya. The intelligence, you just said intelligence, it's consciousness, intelligence, that is the ultimate reality.
I did not say consciousness, intelligence. I said existence, consciousness is the final reality. Existence consciousness enjoys the capacity to manifest the universe. That capacity is called Maya. Maya just means capacity to manifest the universe. Just like the awareful being now enjoys the capacity to manifest the dream world. That capacity is called, you could say, Maya capacity, right? When the dream world is created, then you, the awareful being, are called Ishvara. Okay? So Sat and Chit just gains a different name in reference to a created universe. So Sat and Chit is Sat and Chit. When the manifest world is operating, that same Sat and Chit we call? No, Ishvara. Ishvara. Okay. So nothing has changed. Sat and Chit still remains existence awareness.
Thank you.
So that's kind of on the samashti level, but on the vyashti level, I'm a little bit confused now where the jiva comes in, because Ishvara creates jiva, doesn't it?
Okay, good. So the question is, it's actually not that hard because, okay, one reality manifests by the power of its potential, the world. Okay? When the world is manifest, what manifests? Time, space, and objects. Now, when I say the word objects, that is divided into two, sentient and insentient. Insentient is the periodic table of elements, space, air, fire, water, earth. Sentient is you. So you are one of the manifestations of this knowledge and power. Just like a rock. The only difference between you and a rock is you have a subtle body and a rock does not. So even though the rock is also Sat and Chit and you're also Sat and Chit, the rock cannot say I am, but you can say I am. Okay, so don't think that the rock is one thing over there, it's all like mithya and I am Satyam alone. The whole thing is Satyam, manifesting in different names and forms. Wherever there is mithya, that's exactly where Satyam is. Where is the question of difference? Wherever there is Ishvara, that's exactly where awareness is. Wherever there is form, that's exactly where awareness is. Wherever there is world, that's exactly where awareness is. This is why we don't discard the world. Because the world is you. The world is one. Manifesting is many. because the whole thing resolves into one reality. One reality, which is Sat and Chit, is called different names from different standpoints. It's called Ishvara from the standpoint of manifesting as the whole thing. One reality, Sat and Chit, is called Jiva from the standpoint of manifesting as a thing with a body. One reality is called a rock from the standpoint of something that looks like a rock. It's all one reality.
So the isness, that is what all has, all manifestation has, is isness.
Yeah.
And the isness refers always to the chit.
Exactly. In other words, you cannot claim anything without it silently possessing that isness. Rock is. That isness is chit. Space is. Space is. Depends on chit. Time is. Depends on chit. Wherever time is, that's exactly where chit is. So even space is nothing but awareness. Just different names and forms of the one reality. It was never about discarding, not this, not this, not that, not this. This is lovely, but it's a beginner level work. Eventually, one has to release this idea of subject-object. Because where is the question of subject-object within the ocean? The whole thing is within one ocean.
And the same is with cause and effect.
Yeah, so the effect, as we said, is just, right, manifestations of the one cause. But wherever there is an effect, that's exactly where the cause is. Wherever there is a wave, that's exactly where the ocean is. Wherever there's an ocean, that's exactly where the water is. It's one obtaining different names and forms from different standpoints. And you just happen to be one name and form that looks like this. And Ishvara is name and form that is manifesting as the whole thing. So while there is a difference between you and Ishvara, in reference to you're a small thing, Ishvara is a huge, infinite reality, the sameness is in the water, in the one substratum, which is known all the time as is. Wave is, ocean is. In other words, wave because of water, ocean because of water. Okay, so if we turn Vedanta into some kind of a, world is, I don't want to reconcile the world, I just want to, why do I need to attend to my emotions? Why do I need to, look at my mind? This is not what we're about. Like Indra, humble. I want to know the whole thing. I want to also address my own inner stuff because the whole thing is within Ishvara's order. And Ishvara has made it such that I cannot cheat the system. And cheating the system involves not following the rules of the game. We didn't set up the rules of the game. Ishvara did. What I want to say is, how many pages do we have? Okay, we'll get through it tomorrow. Is that when it comes to pramana, you don't get to choose what should be listened to and not listened to. Because when it comes to a teaching, there is a tendency to discard some things that I don't want to hear about. For example, you could say that, right, I'm not comfortable with emotions. Therefore, I don't want to listen. I'm not comfortable with coming up. Therefore, I don't want to come up and give a presentation. I'm not comfortable with, reincarnation. Therefore, I don't want to listen about reincarnation. I'm not comfortable with the world. Therefore, I don't want to analyze the world. All of these things, what they're doing is they're reinforcing divisions, little by little. And the whole journey becomes Dvaita Advaita. In other words, non-duality is somewhere over there and duality is over here. Most of these teachings will be, right, could be a disguise of this, where I don't want to know about the world, so the world is one thing and awareness is another thing. So it's basically Dvaita Advaita. Therefore, when it comes to pramana, the mark of maturity which Indra enjoys is a mind that is willing to at least stay long enough to see how there could be something in the teaching. I've seen so many times when I speak to the Western audience, the moment I mention karma, like reincarnation or continuity of life, gone. No, this is not how it is. I've grew up in a different kind of environment. I don't believe in this nonsense. Well, who are you to discard 5,000, 10,000 years of tradition of beautiful, brilliant minds thinking about this since 5 years old? Having debates, finding logical inconsistencies, bringing it all together into the Vedas. And the person says, I don't want to listen to this. You see how there's this individual who's trying to own it, trying to own what is good for little me and what I want to reject. The whole pramana is about dissolving this little me. The little me who wants to retain itself as what is worthy of listening to and what is not worthy of listening to. Okay? Therefore, nobody is above the scriptures. Really, no one is above the scriptures. Now, I know it kind of sounds like, no, it's an authoritative statement. I say this because the scriptures, if you go through it, you will see it has incredible insights that by going through it, you can't contradict it. The whole Brahma Sutra is nothing but logic after logic after logic from 10,000 different angles. And you see how brilliant the tradition is, how well thought out it is. On the basis of that, one can have faith. So this is not blind faith, but on the basis of so much work from different angles and being attacked from so many different angles, Vedanta has still survived. It's thriving because it's mentioning what is right now. So on the basis of that, one can also have faith. In fact, for me, my first teacher, right before I was into many things like many of us were, when I sat down with James, it was my first teacher. For me, it was literally 99% faith. I didn't question, I don't believe it. I was like, yeah, this has got to be true because it comes from the scriptures. It's got to be true because it has logic. It has, it's making sense to me right now. It was 99% faith that did it for me. So it's not always this logic. I have to work it out. It has to all make sense. Sometimes you just sit back and you go, I have total, utter faith that what is being spoken is true. And that can save so much time, so many years of intellectualizing this and turning it into it has to make sense. Faith alone. And does the teaching work like that? Super fast. That's called surrender. You surrender this little individual that Vayu and Agni had, let it go, and say, I don't know, I want to be totally transformed by this knowledge. Who am I? If I figured it out, then I wouldn't be here. I would have figured it out a long time ago. But the fact that I'm still trying to find my way means I haven't really figured it out. Therefore, surrender alone can go a long way. And this is something that we don't often talk about. It's all about it's got to make sense. Sometimes it doesn't have to make sense immediately. You can work on faith alone. Shraddha. That's why in Tattva Bodha, Sadhana Chatushtaya, one of the fourfold qualifications is just total trust in the teacher. Total trust in the teaching. And that can save you a long way. And the next verse, Indra, having gained this knowledge, will pass this on to Agni and Vayu. Look at this. Agni and Vayu missed the chance of Uma. But they don't have to go straight to Uma. They can go to someone that they know, someone they're comfortable with. So this is how the tradition works. It gets passed on through different people. Comments, observations before we close?
I want to ask something about the start of the scriptures. They are revealed to the rishis.
Yeah.
By the rishis. Was that the same time as many rishis? That the same knowledge came true. Came true.
So it is an oral tradition. We don't know, first of all, when it's revealed. We just say it is an oral tradition passed down orally. So who first wrote it down, who came up with it, who thought of it, is just beyond our observation. But the way that it works is that when you observe a certain understanding, like an object is always going to fall down, then you understand there is some force that is consistent, and then you give that force a name called gravity. And in that sense, that force is revealed, but it's now spread to those who wish to know about it. So in that same way, when this knowledge is revealed, when it's seen by the seer, by the rishi, then the rishi will, right, communicate it to his students, the students will spread it, and then the way that the tradition works in India is they're all debating each other, they're all talking to each other, so there's a lot of communication. And right, certain teachings will come. And this is how those 6 schools of philosophy came. Remember, a lot of what Vedanta borrows is from Sankhya. You see how we cannot put Sankhya down? And Sankhya, what they did is they saw Vaisheshika, which says that matter is absolutely real, atoms are absolutely real, the world is indestructible. Sankhya saw flaws in that. And Vaisheshika saw flaws in Chavarka. Chavarka is basically just party, right?
Sing, dance, drink, and be married.
Yeah. Drink, be married, and be married. This is Chavarka. Okay? So like this, we have everyone who got involved, who has gotten us to this place. And who are all of these contributors? Nothing but Ishvara. So who has ultimately saved you? You see this? People who you never met, which are nothing but manifestations of Ishvara. Where is the question of putting anything down? It was Ishvara all along that has gotten you to this place. And when a person recognizes this, this is where devotion comes. How can I possibly have devotion if I'm looking at this, they don't know anything? You see, there's a disconnect. Or in the class, all that is here is Ishvara. But then I look at someone out there and I don't see any reverence in them. I don't see any reverence in Ishvara, which is indicative of my own understanding. Ishvara has been saving you all along. This is where reverence comes. Therefore, all of these traditions, they have a place. Those who are still in Chavarka, they're there because they're there. So were you and I, some life before. Slowly, slowly, we come to the final knowledge. So this is the journey of the jiva.
So could you say that Ishvara is sending us Mr. Putin in order for us to train and test the knowledge?
Ishvara is sending us what?
Mr. Putin, the president of Russia. Because of course he's so...
He's an asura.
It's a big asura.
Yeah.
But we have to apply the knowledge with him too. Well.
Yes. So in other words, right, so this is your own work, where how do you look at this person without putting them into a box? It's a cause-effect relationship. How many causes took place for that person to be who they are? And they're fighting for their own values, for what they stand for a country that they believe in. So again, rather than put him into a box, I can look at it objectively. It is a product of many, many decisions that has gotten them to be this kind of a president. They're not evil or good. It's just the kind of assessments, conclusions they've came up with through their own thinking. And in their own understanding, their own conscience, they're recognizing this is the best thing for my country. But the law doesn't exempt them. So they may think they're doing the right thing, but the law is set up that it will accurately show to that jiva how much they have really been keeping with the laws. And they may not show in this life, they may show in the next life. And you won't be there to see what happens. But if you could, boy, would that be sometimes Interesting, right? Let me see what's gonna happen. Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.